have tried to solve them. Like, what is a human? How did we come to be the way we are? Where are we going? What happens before we're born? What happens after we die? And the biggest question is why? Trying to understand the purpose or the reason behind everything that happens in the cosmos. So the mysteries have always sought answers to these things, unlike the more accepting and believing temperament, which worships mysteries and tries to keep them as mysteries. The students of the mystery schools have always tried to solve these things and have always had them proven to them through their own experience. A class like this has its limitations because it's all very second-hand, whereas only when we find things in ourselves directly with our intuition, or when we take all of the effort that is necessary to unfold the higher kind of perception, only then can we see things and really know them and begin to test them out. So the mystics, or the students of the mystery schools, the way the myths are looked at is as being literally true. In some cases there are inversions, but the myths are stories about the gods, about the kingdom of the gods, and of all of the things that happen in those inner worlds which we sense around us but don't always directly perceive. And mystics take them that way. In fact, the mystic would say that it is incorrect to take them as merely symbolic. To some extent, we'll be looking at myths as symbols, but the mystics have always claimed that a symbol conceals as much as it reveals. And it is only when we are in the darkened state of materialism where on one hand we can perceive things in this world but not see the inner meanings or not directly perceive them, except if one has unfolded the eye of truth. As long as we are in our cosmic quarantine or in our imprisonment in the earth and removed from the more direct perception of truth and spiritual reality, then the symbol must be the gateway between them. So we're going to take the myths as literally as possible and recognize that they represent the essence of the life of truth. That gods are embodiments and expressions of creative truth, and that everything that comes to being in the cosmos, even the things that crystallize down to becoming history in this world, are actually part of the stories that the gods lived through. And in their living of them, they produce the materials out of which we as lower creators take the stuff and create the world that we live in. And so this is going to be, like if you're looking for something like symbolic or psychological outlook of mythology, it's not going to be that at all. It's quite a bit more radical than that. The stories also represent a shorthand for the various kinds of truths and experiences that we undergo along the way. One of the chief of all principles that are used by the mystics is called the principle of analogy. And this is the way that the unity of spirit is maintained on each level of succeeding materialization or manifestation from itself. The principle of analogy is usually called the Hermetic axiom, and it was stated by an alchemist in about the 4th or 5th century AD in the form that we know it now. It goes, as above, so below. What has gone before in heaven will follow after on earth. Know this and rejoice. And it's sort of a way that of stating that truth that we realized when we were in about 5th or 6th grade and saw the picture in our science books of an atom and realized that that picture was very similar to the picture of a solar system. And we saw that there was something there, that there was something analogous about the atom and the solar system. And from that we could get the basic principle of analogy, and that's what the stories represent that we're going to be looking at. We've been at this this is an ongoing thing. As you get to know me, I'm a little bit difficult to understand, but if you get to feel me after a while, you'll understand what we're doing. But it seems like it's going on forever. Like listening to these talks or coming to these talks is something like sitting next to a river. You know it just keeps on running. If you don't look, even if you don't look, you know it's there. You know what's going on. And this is the 4th year that we're in of this. And this is my what I'm doing in the astrology classes. Next year I'll be having an introductory astrology class, and I'll be finishing off the beginning this year after having done it all last year and this year. And also next year I'll be starting an intermediary course, and so I'll be running that at the same time. And in 1996, I hope to get it done by sometime in 98, the advanced astrology class will be done. This is going to continue on. I've come to realize that it's going to last at least all of this year and part of next year, at least this subsection that we're in. And then I'll take a year or two on miscellaneous topics. Like there are a few things I want to look at, conceptions of the underworld in various mythologies, and look at the underworld as both the world of the dead as well as the world that is underneath or behind this world. And there are a few topics, like Oedipal topics and things like that I've wanted to talk about for years, but I've never been able to work them into the way the class has been going. The class began there was a general introduction using myths to introduce myths, and then we had a subsection for a number of weeks on creation myths, taking the idea that in everything from making a recipe to making love, that in each of them there is a recreation of the basic creation story. And what we did was we took creation myths from the Hindus and from the Greeks, some from the Tibetans and some from the Native Americans and some from the Bible, and we tried to pull out basic formulae from them. Then we spent a sub-series in myths that were used by mystery schools per se. We talked about Isis and Osiris and Horus, and then we talked a lot about Demeter and Persephone and the Eleusinian mysteries, and then we talked about Dionysius, Bacchus, Zagreus, and the Bacchic mysteries, and then we ended up talking some about the Orphic mysteries. Then we spent an entire year talking about myths of heroes and heroines and how they related to the process of initiation, and how the feats of the heroes and heroines related to things that we do in unfolding our inward consciousness and growing up to become better people. And eventually gods, we hope. Now we're in the second year of another sub-series that is on hierarchy. And last year we introduced the whole idea of divinity, because hierarchy has to do about the orders of gods. And we did that by spending a half a year looking at Hindu myths, most of them creation myths, some of them the same as earlier, and we went on to other Hindu myths, and then we took the second half of the year and we looked at probably the most hierarchical of all mythologies in talking about Egyptian mythology, Ray et al. And this year we're going to talk about hierarchy in Greek mythology, and then we are going to look at either Norse mythology or Teutonic mythology. If I can get the time, I certainly want it to be Teutonic mythology because I have that multi-volume set by Jakob Grimm of the Teutonic mythology, and I've wanted to pour through that for years, and if I get a good Christmas break, we'll do that. And then we'll compare all of the ideas of hierarchy in the different myths, and then we'll go on to hierarchy in much different ways. The obvious question is, knowing how tedious I am and how long it takes to go through all of these things, why spend so much time studying hierarchy? And there are several answers to that, because hierarchy is a topic that allows you to get at almost every level of mythology, from the grand, high cosmological myths down to almost trivial fairy tales. But there's another reason, and that is because in our materialistic world, we have come to see things in a veneer way. We look at things only in the horizontal plane. We never look at something deeper. And there's an obvious fallacy to that, in that some things even matter. Some matter is more important than other matter. If you were in a sinking ship and your only chance of saving the ship and yourself, and it involved throwing out so many things, clearly hierarchy would come in. If your fishing gear and the baby weighed the same amount, you wouldn't throw the baby overboard, if you know what I mean. And so some things are more important than others. And the more we come to know ourselves in an inward way, the more we do develop a pyramid of values. And the more we begin to understand the relative importance of things in our lives. And it is de facto. You can't get away from hierarchy, at least in a temporal sense. The very fact that there is an existence, and that existence has a history, and there is a causality in that history, this gives some things precedence over other things. They happened before other things, and they were causal to other things. And that represents something hierarchical. Various causes have consequences, and to be able to, from antecedents, be able to determine consequences and understand what is going to come of our actions is a very important matter. So that's another reason why we are looking at mythology, the mythology of hierarchy, because we live in a world where people have their values all screwed up. The most shocking example of that I've ever seen in my life is years ago I was visiting at my parents' place, and they had the television on, and we're watching the news. And one of the news stories was thousands and thousands and thousands of little baby chicks were being bulldozed into a pit and covered over. And the whole visual of it was all these little peepers being bulldozed under. And the news interviewer asked the farmer why he was doing that. He said, I can't bring them to market and make money. I would go bankrupt if I brought them to market. And that is a very clear sign. If something isn't worth its own life, then your way of judging worth or your way of finding the value of something is all screwed up. You know, the ancient Chinese were very wise when they said, if heaven can create it, earth can find a use for it. Now we find people murdering each other for sporty jackets and things like that. So the whole idea is that we're going to focus on various principles of hierarchy. Myself, I have almost an obsession both with hierarchy and with ideas. And so the ideas and principles of hierarchy, from as many ways as I can look at them, will be brought in. All right. That's the statement of intent. And all you have to do is live up to that now. There will probably be so many side trips that it'll be hierarchy in just about everything else. We began looking at hierarchy by looking at consciousness. And we did that by examining the attributes of consciousness. And we found in a classical sense the same principle that became the principle of spiritual geometry for all of the mystics. If a point, according to the Pythagoreans, represented being in position. And Pythagoreans had a conception of space as an infinite number of points that were completely contiguous and that had no space at all. They only represented locations. And for them, since all of the points were contiguous, the point could be anywhere and everywhere at the same time. It could be minuscule, and it could be something like a black hole that encompassed all of cosmos. And the point of points was represented as the focus of the divine. And the divine in itself, in its transcendent nature, was pictured as a circle, because it had no beginning, it had no end. Only the spiritual circle had an infinite number of radiuses and an infinite number of centers. Are you raising your hand or stretching it? Stretching it. All right. And so the point represented that kind of being in consciousness. A number of points put together produced another kind of consciousness. It represented a direction in consciousness. And in a linear consciousness, there was a sense of progress. To a large extent, everything that was in the ancient spiritual geometry was based on point, line, and circle. But if each line, the concept of a straight line, meant a directed consciousness where one progressed or advanced and carried out a thought as a vehicle of consciousness to its end, that was what a straight line represented. In that sense, the plane represented all of space. And the idea of being able to understand the totality of space was obviously impossible to the finite mind. Your mind could not stretch all the way to infinity. You could get ideas that applied to all of infinity, but you could not stretch your mind to encompass all of it. So the idea of objectively understanding space was one of the goals. And what the ancient spiritual geometers found was that the least number of lines or the least number of kinds of thoughts that objectified space, so that you had an area of space that was completely contained versus the area of space that was uncontained. They both defined the totality of space. They saw this principle of triangulation as being the simplest way to understand space. And for them, then, the triangle became the symbol of spirit. That which is conscious in being was spirit. And that which was creatively conscious in awakening itself and building vehicles and building even the stuff of the universe through which to awaken itself and become all of the infinite potential that was available to it was what was indicated by spirit. And so the focus was put in the center of the triangle, and if that was awakened spiritual consciousness, it was usually a certain inscribed circle, and it was called the eye in the triangle, and it still is the symbol for awakened spiritual seership to this day. So, as we saw both from Egyptian mythology and from Greek mythology last year, that all religions, when it comes to with waking consciousness, trying to give attributes of consciousness to the creative spirit, they were usually tertiary. That is, there were three balancing aspects, whether they were temporal, like past, present, and future, or whether they were functional, like creation, preservation, and destruction, or whether they had to do with creation, emanation, and fabrication. We looked at a number of these kinds of things relative to different divinities. We took the classical sense in that we took Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiv and looked at myths of them and looked at the attributes of their consciousness relative to those stories. Okay, then we looked at the Egyptian mythology, and we looked at all of the myriad of trinities that they had. We didn't even scratch the surface. I think we looked at something like about 10 or 12 of them, different triads involving Re, something like that. And now we're going to look at hierarchy in Greek mythology, and we're now ready for the talk, and it's almost time to be finished, so it's going to be a very short talk. And it means we get to tell a story. And we're going to tell a story that we have told before, and we're going to look at it a totally different way, which is one of my favorite things that I like to do. It's Sagittarians like to do that a lot. I had two friends that were PhD students in the period where Boethus was at least part of the topic of everybody's PhD. It was the Dark Ages and the ages of chivalry, because there was a professor at the university here that lived a very chivalrous type of life. And he was not only a chivalrous man, but he was a very strong intellectual and artistic influence. And they were both students of his, and they were both Sagittarians. And they would go to a party, and for a week or so afterwards, they would go over little vignettes in the that had occurred in that party, and they would communicate different ideas and different feelings and impressions they had in themselves from that common shared experience. And it would be the same story all over again. And that's the sort of thing we're going to do now. We are going to look at the Plesiogean creation story. I know that Greek people like this, Greek scholars like to say Plesiogean, but as long as we call it the Aegean Sea, I don't feel like I am too far off in calling it the Plesiogean creative story. It's really short, but there are lots of lovely side trips in it. Eurynom, who is the original creatrix, manifest or floated into being out of chaos. She's called the mother of all things, and she floated into existence naked out of chaos. She had no place to rest herself, so within chaos she produced the sky and the sea. And she proceeded to dance on the sea, and as she danced on the sea, she stirred up the winds. And as she stirred up the winds, she danced southward and produced the north wind, which always had the property of being very creatively potent. And as she stirred up the wind behind her, proceeding south, she suddenly turned around and she grabbed the wind, the north wind, in her hands, and she rubbed it and spun it as though you were spinning threads to become cloth. And out of that, the great serpent Ophion was born. It's still in the heavens yet. It's called the constellation of serpents, and the serpent bearer who struggles with it is called Ophiuchus. And when she once had the serpent in hand and continued rubbing it, she danced more and more wildly to warm herself. And the more wildly she danced, the serpent, being a reptile and being cold-blooded, got warmed up, and he became lustful, and he wrapped himself around her, and eventually they coupled. She then took the form of a dove, and she rested then right on the surface of the ocean and brooded for a long, long, long time, maybe eons and eons, and then she laid the universal egg. And at her command, Ophion coiled himself 7 times around the egg and hatched it. And it splits exactly in half, and everything that is in existence tumbles out of the egg. And the creation being done, all that was left for them was to vacate, and so they moved to the top of Mount Olympus. But Ophion was a typical male, and he bragged about being the author of the universe. And Eurynom set him straight. She kicked him in the head and bruised his head, and then she kicked out all of his teeth, and she threw him into the cave, or the caves that are beneath the earth. Having nothing more to do but to keep her cosmos ordered, she created the 7 planetary titans and titanesses, and gave them dominion over various planets, and we'll put the list of them down, and then we'll retell the story and look at some of the principles. For the sun, it was Hyperion, who represents man on high, and Thea, which in translation is divine. For the moon, it was Atlas, And that is he who dares. This is lovely. It's one of those double interpretation. He who dares, or he who suffers. And Phoebe was the Titaness, and her name means bright moon. Bright moon, all right. I'm not being too tidy about this, but I guess tidiness isn't important. And for Mercury, it was Metis, which in translation means counsel. And Koepsel, which means intelligent. For Venus is Oceanus, or Okeanos, if you really like the hard Greek. And that is of the swift queen. You want all of the translations from Greek? You can impress your friends and say that you learned a few Greek names, and you get something out of the class anyway. And Tethys, which represents disposer. For Jupiter, it was Eurymedon, which means wide rule. And Themis, we all know as the Lady Justice, with the blindfold, with the scales in hand, which means order. Or you could even use law or justice if you liked. Mars is Cryos, which means sovereign being. And Dione, divine queen. And final for Saturn, Cronus, which is Crow, or black one, and Rhea, Earth. What? Rhea. And if you know the numbers of her existence, then you have the Rhea stats. I know they're sickening, but I love puns. I had a few good ones over the summer, but I can't remember them. Euryone, just like this, only with None. Uri means wide in Greek, and moon means wandering. I'm not sure what is associated with the word nomen or not. It's not the same as the gnomes in ancient Egypt that we talked about a lot last time. But it is conceivable because no, they were NOMEs also. If there's a G, it is with the Greek. Nomen. Yes.
said Atlas and Phoebe were associated with mythology.
Yes, yes. Phoebe is another name for the moon.
And Hyperion and Theia were the solar clock.
Yes, yes. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Yes, that's a different word. Yes, but the two actually do overlap. We're going to get to that next week when we go back into Orphic creation stories and Orphism. And we're going to relate that to this because it relates to the next topic we're talking about tonight. Because this is very, very unusual in that the first of all things and the creator of all things is the feminine. This myth is an extremely feminine viewpoint, and it has that quality all the way through. If, how to say this, we have the divine masculine in us, and we have the divine feminine in us. And it is equally wrong to ignore the divine masculine as it is to ignore the divine feminine. However, different societies and different groups of people at different times have had needs in order to strengthen their being to choose one or the other. It is usually immature males that are immature because they've been so masculine that require heroes and require mighty beings for them to raise their consciousness. On the other hand, some people have the quality and the need of being receptive, and as a consequence, we have the feminine being the chief of the divinities. Often in the ancient Gnostics and in the Mid-East, the highest being, whether it is the Sophia of the Gnostics or the Devamatri of the Hindus, is always pictured as an open triangle. Sometimes there is a flame in the open triangle. That is to say, the ineffable absolute of which no one can really speak and be cogent, and of which no one can speak and not be cogent, because you just can't speak about it. The relation of that to being, where consciousness is brought into manifest being, that relationship of taking something from all potential, that is in that all potential state, the openness of the triangle represents that. And it is to say that if the primary creative divinity is feminine, it is represented by that open triangle as if to say the root of all being is immersed or actually lost back into the ineffable absolute. And that is what we have when we have something like urinal as being the first creative divinity. It's interesting in that what always happens if you're looking from the viewpoint of the divine feminine, there is a much more humble quality. There's a much more receptive quality about the whole nature of the cosmos. And that's an attitude that goes with it. Now this was probably necessary because the Pelagians, the word Pelagian came to mean to the Greeks almost what at another time the word Chaldean became to mean. Chaldean meant in the Roman Empire anybody who had anything mystical about them at all, because they revered the Babylonians so much and the wisdom that they had not only in astrology but in all of the mysteries, that they said anybody who had any knowledge at all was called a Chaldean. I think you even find that in Shakespearean parlance. But a Placidian meant any one of the ancient peoples, that is, the people that were there before the Dorian and Ionian Greeks. And it meant then an ancient one. And those ancient ones come from a time of consciousness when the focus of the cosmos was still feminine. I don't know how to say this. From a material point of view, the feminine in body, somatically, the feminine is capable of creating in and of itself and by itself. The whole concept of parthenogenesis, or of virgin birth, is something that could only happen with the feminine. Oh, how to get at what I'm trying to get at. The mystery students from seership, the mystery students find that reading back into the memory of nature, which is all of the impressions from everything that has been manifest in the external world, find that at first we were male-female, and that we separated. This was at the same time that the earth, the same time meaning over millions of years, at the same time that the earth separated within the solar system, we separated in our individuality. And previously, like we were single-celled beings. And the creative nucleus, like where all the DNA activity takes place in a cell, was located in what is now the voice box, and eventually the brain, and the genital. It would be sort of like the protoplasm of the cell was also broken, and that was broken in the hands and the feet. And consequently, you have people being pulled out of their body by their feet, or you have the laying on of hands where people can still activate that kind of energy current. But in that period, when we were in masculine bodies, the ability to come out into the external world and do the work that we had to do, the objective activity, was not possible to us yet, because we didn't have the brain so that the creative spirit could indwell and that we could become creative beings and master the world. So all of the guidance and all of the direction and even the biological necessity of humanity was maintained by us when we were in female bodies. And the awakening to the external world was done when we were in male bodies, but I don't want to go too far away into that. But there are alternately successions where the main lessons are given through male bodies or through female bodies. And usually it has things to do with precession of the equinox. Those are very short, those are only 21,000 year periods. Like in the precession of the equinox through constellations that correspond to positive signs like Aries, Gemini, Leo, Libra, Sagittarius, and Aquarius, then the scientists and philosophers and the masculine viewpoint is expressed. When it goes through the feminine signs by precession of the equinox, the feminine point of view is more stressed, and the more accepting, the more religious, the more authoritarian kind of consciousness is the order of the day. Right now we are in a transition from the age of Pisces, which is a feminine orientation. We've had a Catholic outlook both in the Western and Eastern world, and we're moving to a time when the outlook is much more scientific, much more philosophical. Catholic, by that I mean the temperament that is accepted. It's a way of saying those that have as their ideal the highest feminine, like anything from the Virgin Mary to Isis or something of that nature. And it is a time when people learn to live by faith and not by self-determination or by asserting themselves. And Freemasonic applies to anyone that has a fiery temperament rather than a watery temperament, and looks at the world as everybody is being equal, and let's go out and conquer and take over the world. It's a more masculine, so to speak, viewpoint. It doesn't really have to do with you and I, though we have those different kinds of lessons depending on, because we are involved in masculine bodies in this life. In our next life, we'll probably be born as females to learn it from the other point of view and keep some kind of balance within ourselves. Because the ultimate in psychological health is to maintain some kind of health. In fact, we even say people that are off the rocker, or we say that somebody is out of balance if they are insane or in that direction. All right, I got too far off into a side trip that is not what I was necessarily wanting to get into, but the whole idea of having the highest and first of all divinities as being female points to a fact that the feminine dominated the whole first part of creativity. The part that we are in now, the masculine, dominates. And again, after this period is over, the feminine will again dominate, and by then we will get to the point that we will be completely male-female. The reason why the feminine has to dominate is because bodies will still be necessary, and they won't be developed by copulation anymore, because that means we will be developed in a different way, and so it will be something like general parthenogenesis until we can all create bodies by the spoken word. But that's all a whole bunch of side trips that I really didn't want to go into. At any rate, Urinom arises out of chaos, represents the humble spirit that is receiving the creative impulse rather than as somebody who's mighty, who is demanding that the creation take place. Both outlooks are true, but this myth gives a totally different feel to it. And she arises naked because this is a representation of pure spirit. That is to say, there have been no manifestations or differentiations of any kind. This is a state that we derive from and that ultimately we return to. Even in this life, there are a number of years where we take on more and more qualities as we grow up, and we take on more and more beliefs, and we take on more and more illusions about ourselves. Somewhere after the middle of life, we begin throwing things off as being clean, as being lesser of importance, and eventually we come to a unity with ourselves, within ourselves. And I think this is the desire of all of us, is to know ourselves as we really are, without any preferences, without any illusory forms, because once we have become ourselves, we don't need the vehicles of expression anymore, except to share. It's far away from what I'm trying to get to, that we don't need the tools that we use to become what we are. When we are those things, then we are again naked. So your gnome arises naked in chaos, and chaos is the way that they chose to describe that state of the absolute. And it's a relative state. There are various levels of chaos. The differentiation within chaos of water and of air, or of wind, indicates that this is exactly as you would expect with the creation being from the feminine point of view. From the masculine point of view, there are four elements that are usually looked at. Even in the Chinese system, there are four elements plus one neutral: fire, air, water, earth. The air, that is the gaseous and the fluidic elements, are the most subtle. They're the most subjective. They're the most malleable. Fire and earth are each in their own way extremely dramatic. And you would expect then, in a feminine point of view of creation, you would expect water. Especially the water, because everything rests on the water, because in terms of creation, the spiritual masculine is manifest in will. We will things into creation, but there still needs to be a means, a middle. And so the spiritual feminine is the imagination. But at the level that we're speaking of, where there is all such unity, and is that way all the time, if we can get to that deeply in ourselves, and something that you can note from your own experience, it is not clear whether the will informs the imagination or whether the imagination draws out the will. It's different from the point of view that you're looking at. You could say in the simple male-female sense, caveman style, you could say that a man dominates a woman. But it is equally valid to say that a woman dominates a man by drawing him out. And the outlook that we're looking at here is at the very most subtle of all. And so the Plesiogeans chose, by nature and by need, to look at the rarest of the spirituality in the feminine outlook, and to look at things with subtlety rather than drama, rather than having to overpower things or have very shocking differentiations. Now, it's important that it is the north wind. I'm just going to leave that hang for right now, because eventually we're going to look at hierarchy in space. That is the different dimensions and directions of space, and the kind of consciousness that is associated with each of them, and the hierarchical quality that is associated with that. And that is both in terms of compass space or in terms of local space, like right, left, front, back, up, and down. The 6 dimensions of space in that way. And the serpent, obviously, you can look at this materialistically and you can see a nude lady dancing on the water. But if you're looking at a subtlety of spirit that is moving on the state of substance, that it is not clear whether it is spirit or matter, derives within itself or draws within itself a focus again, we're back at the line, and we're at a line that is, instead of being straight, is spiral. And that spinning of hers, and that spinning as she moves along, produces very subtle spirit matter, air, water, it's called here, it's a subtle essence, produces a very subtle stream of energy. And it's no different than us riding down the highway in an automobile. We're going somewhere. Urinome is also going somewhere. She's creating, and that subtle spiral spinning serpent that is produced behind her, it's behind her because you see it only in the after effect, represents her direction of consciousness, represents her intent. And so then we have in a very unusual way defined the difference between a creativity that is drawing and imaginative and extremely subtle, and a force that is cunning and serpentine that works within it, that is the representation of the creative intention. Oh, I left something hanging before. I don't know that, you know what I find the strongest way to develop the willpower? To create and hold a picture without moving that picture. It takes an enormous, you can picture a plant and you can picture the plant moving and growing and changing shape, but to hold it without moving, it takes an enormous amount of concentration of will. So that is an example of how the will is built through the imagination, and the imagination wraps itself around the will. Because if you have an intent of any kind, you cannot manifest that intent without giving form to it, so that the life of it, that the will of it takes on or takes shape. And that's what we're trying to get at as the union of urinome with the serpent Ophion. Again, she starts dancing, and what we do in our daily spiritual exercises are, because they're creative acts also, they're exactly what happens in this creative myth. I don't know if you have the same experience that I do, but most people that I've talked to, when you go deeper and deeper and deeper into concentration, and you try to penetrate into something and see the inner meaning of it, or to try to understand pure being face to face, the deeper the concentration, the more things begin to spin. Especially the vortex right in the center of the forehead begins to spin. And some people even report seeing a whirlpool of light, very much like the spinning that is of urinal. And so now we're talking about, but it's really nice that it's a dance. It's a creative activity. And the cold is exactly like what modern science would say. It's like something at absolute zero. If everything is at what the mystic would call a Laya point, or what the material scientist would say, the original little bundle of matter, everything was frozen at absolute zero, and it took a warming up. And that warming up, we all know, is love. I don't know about you, but for me, to do daily exercises, concentrate in any form, turn inward in any form, is work. It's very hard work. And it's sacrifice. And we don't become warm people without making sacrifice. And people who love make sacrifices. At least that's the way I find it. It's absolute truth. And so the dance of Eurynomé, which to her is a very great joy, it's described as a dance, is a sacrifice in that what she is drawing into existence is a labor. And it's a labor that is being done in joy. So everything is spinning more and more, and everything is getting deeper and deeper. Ophion gets excited, and I don't know how to say it. If you're looking from the feminine point of view, or if the feminine is undeveloped in itself, there is a tendency to masculinely project and say, he did it. But at any rate, it is the quality, the love of the unknown that is manifest as a curiosity that is right in the center of that vortex that is spinning. It is, as we see it, as a galaxy or the whole cosmos that's spinning, that the unknown of it, the magnetic quality of it, the drawing quality that raises the lust in the Ophion is the quality of curiosity. Like, we have to know, and that's what gets it all, this is all going. But at any rate, they unite, and she becomes a dove. This is a universal symbol. On the zodiac, there are quaternaries and trinaries. We talked a little bit before about creation, preservation, adaptation, and destruction. This is, in the West, this is called Father. This is associated with the Son. This is associated with the Holy Spirit. This is, in the East, it's Brahma, Vishnu, Shiv. That there is a constant balance between these in creation. Well, the fixed signs are associated with the creation. The common signs with the adoption and preservation, and the destruction through the actual outward doing of it is associated with the cardinal sign. The masculine fixed signs are Aquarius and Leo. But the actual feminine, oops, I gotta fix this up. The feminine fixed signs, that is the receptive pole that has to do with the stuff and the urge to creation, are ruled by Taurus and Scorpio. And for time immemorable, Taurus is associated with the dove, and Scorpio as the serpent. So you find it everywhere. You find it even in the Gospels, where Jesus says, "Be ye wise as serpents and gentle as doves." And so what is quoted here, or what we are to understand here, is that the subtlety of spirit is so gentle. The power of will, as awesome as it seems, and the best way you can think of it is to pick up a little piece of railroad track. Just a little 10-inch piece, and it's heavy. And then if you think of the whole earth being millions of tons of matter that is dense and heavy like that, and that is nothing compared to the universe. All the matter is being flung and rotated through space by the will to be and by the concentration of God collectively at various centers. The power of will seems awesome. But on the other hand, it is subtle. The more subtle something is, the more powerful it is. Dropping that piece of railroad track on your toes is very hard and heavy. But that's gross compared to the power of thought. Power of thought, which can accomplish that and can even change matter, is much more powerful, but it's more subtle. When you get to the power of pure spirit that is represented by Urinom, that is spirit that is so pure that it is naked and floating because there aren't even elements for it to be manifest in, for it to be polarized in like air and water, you have the ultimate of subtlety. And so you find her brooding and creatively working while floating on the matter that's so subtle that it's no more than water. And the serpent is surrounding all of this, and it in itself is a cunning type of activity, and even though it is the more gross of the two, it still is extremely subtle. And so we have within the creative activity of Ophion and Urinom, we have a whole bunch of things that are told to us about the cosmos that we experience in a way that the symbols are extremely relevant to our lives. Because I don't know about you, but for me the way it works is that things are born like eggs to me. I take things into me, I experience things, and I'm slow, and it's a long time for them to sink into me, and I ponder on them. And it's almost as if part of me in the back of my consciousness is working on them all the time. And then there comes a time, usually of necessity, and sometimes just of serendipity, and they're born. And they're born whole. And sort of the whole idea of the cosmic egg, that is light space being born within dark space, or something bright and finally being born out of something dark and subtle. And so everything comes to being, and he's a typical man who projects and brags and having nothing else to do. He talks about all of his extreme creative activities. Now we come to something in the myth that I don't understand. And that is, in most of the other myths, it is usually the serpent that bruises or wounds the heel of the firstborn. And in this myth, I don't know if it's because of the femininity, but in this myth, the firstborn bruises the serpent. I understand somewhat the knocking out of the teeth. On one hand, it is removing its poisonous potency, but on the other hand, teeth represent the necessity to physically gain food. And it is by the grinding process, the biting process, the chewing process that we gain food. Some people even think that when it says in the Bible in the final days that there will be a weeping and gnashing of teeth, only those that are still so unevolved to need teeth yet would be the ones that would be cast out. But I don't understand it. Part of it I do understand, because this goes back to something that we talked about when we talked about the Sangreal. We talked about Galahad healing all of those kings, one after another, as he came into his own. The viewpoint that I think is being expressed in this myth, I don't know much of the rest of the Plesagian mythology, is that if Ophion being cast into the underworld represents the Phonian forces, the unconscious manifestation of the spirit as instinct, then the incompleteness of nature, incomplete because cause is separated from effect, and the experience, the jury is still out on the experience of the creation, and it's still unknown. Nature is then seen as a gigantic wound, and it is a constant trying to heal that wound that is the whole cosmological process of creation. Yeah. Yeah. Can you help yourself? Okay. Yes. Yes. In one way that the teeth, meaning that the force of potency to spirit, in a way, nature is poison. Just like all food is poison to the body. It's a foreign substance. I just heard something tonight about this new treatment for rheumatoid arthritis. And rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune disease where your immune system attacks you rather than defends you. And the doctors recognized very clearly that food in itself is a foreign particle, and we are allergic to food. It represents a poison to us, and the immune system represents the overpowering of that foreign substance. And to spirit, all of what we call nature, or the manifestation in which we live, is a congealed ignorance. It represents that part of the absolute, the unknown, that is condensed by the spirit that knows, and there is an interface between the known and the unknown. And so the kicking out of the teeth represents taking away the poisonous quality. In one way, in another way, the teeth represent the gaining of experience through nature by a very grinding experiential process rather than by the direct apperception that comes with intuition. Yes, it's right. Passive, taking in of the whole object. I don't mean to say that I have all of the interpretations for the myth. Not at all. I'm just giving a few to carry a stream of consciousness along, and we're setting up for next time we're going to talk about another creation myth, and into the two of them we'll look at some principles of hierarchy. All right. The myth is out of order, at least the way it is normally told, because I believe that the planetary hierarchs are developed before the egg is split, and that their coming into being is associated with the splitting of the egg. The fact that the egg splits right in half is, again, going right back to the same theme that is universal: the fire, the air, and the water, and the everything being in a balanced mode. Let's talk a little bit about hierarchy and then quit for the evening. I meant for this only to be about an hour long, and I got carried away again, and repetitiously carried away. This order of the planetary spirits is from the viewpoint of nature, of matter, of stuff, of planes of existence. You could call this one, it's most clearly stated by Philippus Areolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, who we know as Paracelsus, the great alchemist and spiritual healer, that these represent on a sliding scale as well as in a universal scale, they represent the planes of existence. This is the list of metals in the Treatise on Alchemy by Paracelsus. This is gold, silver, mercury, copper, tin, iron, and lead. So these represent the strata of matter. We're going to be looking at three types of hierarchies throughout the rest of the series of talks. This is of space or of matter. This is very much like saying, like in our solar cosmos, this is the realm of God, this is the realm of silver virgin spirits, this is the realm of the divine spirit, this is the realm of the light spirit, this is the realm of mind, this is the realm of desire, and this is the realm of dense physical earth matter. This is the material order. We could have given the order by time, which would be Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Saturn. This is the famous, this is again, has a name to it, the Ptolemaic order. And this has to do with the rapidity of change of consciousness in us. And that is, of all of the visible bodies, the moon moves the fastest in time, and Saturn moves the slowest in time. And then we have the cosmological order, which is the changes of consciousness. And those go like 3 days of the week. So let's do it the right way. Saturn, Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Venus. So we have 3 different hierarchies of the planetary spheres or the realms, and it all depends on whether we're looking at matter or form or space, whether we're looking at time or spirit or awakened consciousness, or whether we're looking at soul or that which is in the process of change. So there are 3 different kinds of orders of hierarchy. Eventually we're going to talk a lot about this, why one holds precedence over another, and try to talk about it in the way that we express things, the way we experience things in our spiritual consciousness. Hopefully we'll get there. That's about as much as we can say tonight. Next time we'll look at the orphic view of creation and hierarchy in that, and compare the two a little bit and get at a few principles of hierarchy. If you want something to read between now and next time, there are a few orphic hymns you can get a hold of, but most likely the best thing to read, it's quasi-orphic, is the Theogony by Hesiod. He is the poet that recorded the creation myth that is considered orphic. Are there any questions? means birth of the gods, and it's by Hesiod. It's dark and obscure. We're not going to go into it in great detail. Though I am getting ambitious again and thinking that somewhere in here on hierarchy, I don't know whether I'm going to do it in hierarchy or whether I'm going to do it in visions of the underworld. I want to look at Dante's Inferno and have fun with that. That would be one that we could all read at the same time and make wild ideas, and we'll take turns giving the talk. All right, that's about as far as we're going to go tonight. Yes, 2 weeks. In fact, there may even be times when it has to be longer because I won't have the opportunity to prepare. But hopefully we'll build up steam, and by next semester we'll probably be meeting once a week because by then I will have gotten away from some of the backlog. I didn't know, but yes. 2 weeks from today. I don't even know what that is. The Thursday after next. Maybe by then it'll be October 7th. All right. Maybe by then it'll be, would you like to have less light and less heat? Or would you prefer having, I can't do that. Yeah, I can't do that. As winter sets in, it'll be nice. We use less light. Oh, okay. Alright. So you've been doing those Buddhist kinds of meditations where you managed to go out naked and